said he would be here in a little bit for his agenda item.
All right.
Go ahead and get started then. All right, we'll call the meeting of the Land Use Committee to order. And item number 1, drones.
All right. So, in your packet, you saw that we received a letter to the planning mailbox concerning drones operating in Port Orchard, and the citizen wanted to know what, if anything, the city could do concerning regulation of drones. And make sure we're recording here.
Yeah, you just had kind of an echo.
Oh, gotcha. So anyway, the Carrie has done some research into this and provided some information from the FAA. I don't think that it's our recommendation that the city take any specific action at this point in time, but we wanted to bring the complaint forward and let you know of the issue. And I don't know if you want to provide any more insight into what you found when you looked into this, or
Basically, the white paper from the FAA is guidance for local government on what federal regulations are for drones and what the FAA agrees that state and local powers are. They just issued also a new set of rules for drone operators on June 21st, which is effective at the end of this August. So these are the rules, the FAA rules that drone operators are expected to abide by. So this is just kind of to give an understanding of how drone operators are already regulated by the FAA, what ability state and local authorities have to further regulate, and just kind of to let you make a decision when you want to take this up any further. I don't think it's really a land use issue. I think this is more of a police enforcement issue, honestly.
And it sounds like in this issue, they're out of line of sight.
The neighbors complain?
Yeah.
It sounds like it. So that's a violation of the
Right.
FAA rules. But our ability to enforce that currently is pretty limited.
911 call,
Yeah.
police presence.
Because I mean, it's already, if the guy thinks people are spying on him, it's already illegal to be a voyeur, to trespass, to do these things. So
Do we know if there's even been a call to say, please stop? I mean, if there's been any communication between the,
it sounds like he
No.
knows who it probably is, but he doesn't want to
Got
deal
it.
with it neighbor to neighbor.
He wants to be anonymous.
sometimes a phone call could go a long ways.
Yeah, I would say that we've had the one inquiry, and I wouldn't elevate it on our priority list of things to do unless it became more of an issue, and then we could.
Again, I think it's not really a land use issue. Yeah,
Correct.
it's an operation of a vehicle, honestly, an unmanned vehicle. So it really, I think it's more of a
We
police.
Go to the police.
Yeah.
and I don't know, maybe have we copied the police on any of these as far as the new rules that are going in place, and is it even something that they can enforce as a federal?
No, they don't have
Yeah.
authority to enforce
So
federal, yeah.
Yeah.
So we would have to adopt guidelines that are within the purview authority that the FAA says, yes, you can make rules about these kinds of things, but we don't want you saying how high people can fly, how much their drones can weigh, what they can do. They don't want their authority superseded.
Right.
But if you want, I can forward this on to the police chief and
I think
Has
that's
an
what we
interest
should
in
do at this
pursuing
point, just see how it plays out.
okay.
Somebody's got a complaint, and that's really the proper,
Yeah.
if somebody thinks their rights are being violated, that's really within the rules that exist. But is that the FAA that enforces that, or our police department? If it's voyeurism, it's difficult to prove.
Yeah,
but-
unless they're posting something online or there's some evidence
Guess you could have a noise
that is captured.
ordinance issue.
Yeah. It's not till 10 o'clock at night.
And I don't think a drone is making like 80 decibels or whatever. Yeah.
a civil matter that he would have to, this person would have to step up to.
Well, common sense,
Yeah.
reporting the issues is how they're probably gonna have to deal with it if they don't wanna go talk to a neighbor.
Nice next step is just for
Yeah.
the neighbor having a quick
Do
little
you want me
conversation.
to contact this gentleman who,
Yeah, I think maybe let's just,
I'm not even sure how we got this email, honestly, went to the just general city hall mailbox.
let's just mention it to the police department, and so if there are local rules, like you said, such as voyeurism, but, you know, understanding that it's difficult to prove, we can say, we talked to the police, they're aware of it,
Okay.
but there's not a whole lot we can do unless they've actually broken a crime that our police can, or committed a crime that our police can enforce.
Okay,
And it was pretty limited what we could do. I mean, if they were attaching firearms to it, we could put that in the ordinance. Or if they were
Recognition, property damage or.
or if they were interfering with them hunting and fishing. I mean, there were only 4 bullet points that we could put in on it.
Right.
Yeah.
and I think we probably are able to enforce all 4 of those through
With that.
existing law. Yeah.
Okay. Next item.
All right, so the next item, administrative conditional use permits. This has been a long-standing issue that we've been dealing with in our department. Essentially, when the code was rewritten in 2007, it included this administrative conditional use permit provision in our land use tables. However, no code for the processing or issuance of administrative conditional use permits was ever written. And so we've sort of had to improvise our way through this over the years. And one of the things we realized is that when we went to adjust our fees in the fee schedule, is that the amount of work that goes into administering our improvised process is substantial, because we have to write a written report and findings and issue a decision in our department, which is somewhat time consuming. But that administrative CUP applications vary greatly in terms of their intensity and really the need for that extra level of scrutiny. And for instance, home-based businesses are facing a rather steep permit application fee, and they only may be trying to operate a business out of their house that is generating minimal income and is not going to justify the expenditure of getting this sort of permit. In addition, our attorney has provided our previous attorney had suggested that this is not a process that legally we ought to be doing, that we ought to have permitted outright or conditional uses, and that if we want to adopt additional standards that apply to some permitted uses, that's fine. But she didn't recommend doing the administrative CUP process. Our current attorney said, I generally agree with that, although plenty of cities do this, but you would want to have provisions for the issuance of the administrative CUP, which you don't currently. And so I think from a code streamlining standpoint, our recommendation is actually to eliminate the administrative CUP and simply make uses permitted outright or a conditional use. And so we've gone through our zoning tables and we've identified for each of the uses where an A appeared in our table, we've either changed that to a P or we've changed it to a conditional use permit, a C. And in some cases, we've made some minor adjustments to the footnotes that are associated with those, because the footnotes generally are how you attach the additional requirement associated with that particular use. We also found a handful of minor issues in the footnotes, including one, I think we had referenced the incorrect use to our adult use provisions, and so we wanted to clean that up. But really the only uses that we've taken from an A to a C are bed and breakfasts and commercial parking lots where you're building a parking lot that's not associated with another use, that the parking is the primary use. The rest of them have been changed to a P, and specifically for home-based businesses, we already have a home-based business code, and so we already have a provision where we notify the neighbors and have the ability to revoke licenses if the impacts of that particular use become too great. And so it's our recommendation to just simplify our use table to either be a permitted use or a conditional use.
I have one question. And it's, you made a change, I don't know which page, it is. It's way in the back. And it's number 8, and it's redlined, second from the back.
Which,
100? Oh,
About ADUs?
Yeah. It says accessory dwelling unit shall be located on or above the second floor of the primary building which is located. Standalone accessory dwelling units are not allowed. So my question is, what defines an accessory dwelling unit?
so that was one of the issues here. If you look in the accessory use table, it previously said residential living quarters, which wasn't defined in our definitions chapter. And then, but accessory dwelling unit was defined.
And what is it?
So that is either like a backyard cottage or an attached mother-in-law type of apartment, but it could also be in the context of, sometimes storage units. They will put in a residence for a caretaker, or you'll have
My question on this is, in my house, I live on
Mhm.
the main floor, and then I have a daylight basement.
Mhm.
And I finished that daylight basement so that my parents could live down.
Mhm.
Now, is that an accessory dwelling?
that is.
yes, but
Okay,
I think
so-
what you're concerned about,
the same
this,
structure though.
the footnote 8 that you're looking at, that only refers to the commercial zones.
Okay,
So you
I
have to
just-
have all
because it's-
residential above the ground
because-
floor.
because it says above, on or above the second floor.
Yeah.
And what I have is in a daylight basement, so it's below the ground
Exactly.
floor.
Right, but footnote 8 only applies in commercial zones. So
Okay.
it's like what Nick is saying, if you have storage units and you have a resident manager's unit on, the top floor or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it does not affect the residential zoning at all.
Okay, perfect.
And, along those same lines, a lot of cities do adopt standards for detached accessory dwelling units, which is something we may want to consider down the road. But I know that in my neighborhood, Tacoma just adopted a pilot program to sort of test this out because they haven't previously allowed detached units, especially in the historic districts. But they're wanting to go in that direction, but I think that there's a lot of hesitation on the part of the elected officials to do that, and a lot of the neighbors are sort of opposed to that possibility, but they're trying it out. Other cities have it in place and it works really well. But right now we would be allowing them in this case.
We've allowed them in the past.
Yeah, correct. So this is allowing them without a whole lot of standards.
Is there a size limitation?
Nope, not at this time.
Is there-
It's gotta- it's got-
50% of the main.
Yeah, it's got to be smaller than the primary use because then it ceases to be accessory.
Is there an owner occupation requirement?
Nope.
Yes.
Okay.
Is it?
Isn't there?
The county does.
The county has that, yeah.
What's footnote number 3?
I
Currently,
think one of them has to be owner-occupied, I'm trying to think.
I believe currently,
Yeah, the primary residence where the accessory dwelling
Oh,
unit
yeah.
shall be owner-occupied. This wasn't changed, this was already in
Yeah.
there.
Sorry. So anyway, I think this is, mostly just a sort of a housekeeping thing, with the exception that we're making 3 uses go from an administrative conditional use to a full conditional use. And I think that for the bed and breakfasts already are a conditional use in almost every zone, but in the business professional zone, for some reason, there were administrative CUPs, and so we felt that they should be conditional there. And then as I said, the parking lots are when that's the primary use of the property. So we have the diamond lot down by the Annapolis Ferry that is the only use on that piece of property, and in order to establish that use after this would be changed, you would have to go through a CUP process. So, but if you're just putting in parking to go along with a commercial space, then that's not an issue.
Seems, the changes that you're moving to a P seem reasonable, reasonably permitted for those zones, I don't.
Okay, so this is scheduled for a planning commission review on the 3rd and 2nd. And then upon recommendation from the planning commission, this would likely come back to the city council probably at the end of August. And we do have two people who, what prompted this is we have two people who are trying to establish home-based businesses, and when they found out what the fee was, we said, whoa, this is not realistic. I think one person wanted to be a personal trainer for 3 to 4 people at a time, or 3 to 4 people total, a few times a week, and said that I can't even get my business off the ground due to this fee, and so they're on hold until we can get something passed.
On your one pager here,
Yeah.
starts on page 2, the first red line there at the bottom, signs may allow, just a scrivener's error, signs may be allowed probably. On E.
Thank
Oh.
you.
Is there an instance where signs would not be allowed in accordance with the city's sign regulations?
I think we did this simply because it originally said there should be no exterior display, alteration of the property, or other exterior indication of the home business. And it had been interpreted by some meaning that means you can't have a sign, because that indicates you have a business. It's an alteration to your exterior. So we wanted to make it clear that you may be able to get a sign for your home business.
Should it read, signs shall be allowed in accordance with city sign regulations?
Go either way. I think.
Yeah,
I think that's a little more clear.
Or signs are allowed, or.
Sure.
Yeah.
Something instead
Okay.
of may be allowed. You're either in
I was
accordance
saying
with the
may.
city regs or you're not.
I was saying may because we're going to be bringing forward a new sign code, and we don't know what that sign code's going to necessarily say in a residential zone yet.
Okay.
So that was sort of.
So you're being wishy-washy on purpose.
Yeah, I think that was the reason for that. And, moving forward in the residential zones, we're proposing to allow a limited number of signs, and because they have to be content neutral, whether your house is for sale or it's an election season or you have a home business, that's your allocation for signage at your house. And so you can pick one, but you don't get one of these, one of those, 3 of these. So.
Okay.
Should I change it or leave it alone?
I'm fine with it.
It's
Being
not a
we-
big deal.
Yeah, until we get the sign code.
Okay.
Let's just read what they say.
Just write that, never mind.
All right. Ready for item 3?
Yeah, and I really got to read this agenda first. My name's appearing after a lot of things.
Shoreline
I want her to
Master
explain it.
Program.
Do you want me to talk about it?
Yeah, please.
Okay. We prepared some draft revisions to the existing shoreline master program, kind of at a request from the council and the mayor to try to make it a little bit more amenable to redevelopment of downtown waterfront properties, and I suppose in general, waterfront properties. Most of what we have is built pretty close to the shoreline. If they tear down or redesign, they're subject in the high-intensity environment to a 75-foot setback, and that makes a lot of them almost impossible to redevelop. There's no incentive for people to do improvements to their properties. So one idea that was floated originally was to try to reduce the buffer across the board and just say it's 50 feet, 40 feet, whatever. There's a higher bar with ecology to do that, just to say we're reducing our buffers, because you need to come forward then with science to support that. Why was it that when you did the SMP, you needed a 75-foot buffer, which was presumably backed by science, but now you're coming in and saying you don't need that? So we would have to go through that whole process of demonstrating to ecology why suddenly our circumstances are different and we don't need a 75-foot buffer. So to approach it from a slightly different angle, right now we also say that everything that's within that 75-foot buffer is non-conforming. So what I did was put forth a proposal. Ecology may buy off on this. I'm trying to push a little harder so that we can at least get some of this through, to say that anything that was legally permitted, and that would include with a shoreline conditional use permit or shoreline variance that's now on the waterfront, which is a legal use, is conforming. We're allowed to do that outright for residential units on the waterfront, and I think that we have a good way to say that what we have now is conforming. It makes it easier for people when they want to try to redevelop to get financing, to sell, because that label non-conforming on your property tends to be a bad word. So to say that what we have currently is conforming unless it's an overwater structure that's not water dependent, or it's residential overwater, those need to continue to be called non-conforming. I don't think there's any way to say they are conforming per ecology. So if we say that what we have is conforming, that's one piece that I'd like to see ecology be okay with. And then what happens then is when you want to redevelop your conforming waterfront property, you can. You have your footprint, and if you tear down and redevelop within that footprint, you, the applicant, not the city, are responsible for demonstrating that if you rebuild in that footprint or back from the buffer, that you will not have any additional impacts to the shoreline environment. If you do, you have to mitigate. And we have standards for mitigation. We also say that if you're going to take advantage of this and you're going to be redeveloping within an established buffer, even if you're not going to go further waterward, even if you're not expanding elsewhere on your property, you need to do some compensatory mitigation for existing issues on your site. If you have old pilings, old riprap, anything that would improve the function of the shoreline in that area, we want to see an improvement if you're going to be allowed to take advantage of what's basically an interrupted buffer provision, since you can rebuild in the buffer. So what I did was use the county's appendix for redevelopment and mitigation in the buffers for non-conforming development. That's Appendix D. This is new. And it's not called non-conforming development anymore. It's conforming, but it's for anybody who wants to redevelop within the buffer area. So there's guidance in here for that. You have to meet a number of conditions. If you can't meet them, or you don't want to meet them, you're not willing to meet them, then you have to work with the existing 75-foot buffer. But in any case, it's intended to give people a little more economic advantage, a little more permitting advantage, encourage them to do something good with their property to improve it, and still get a buy-off from ecology because we're not going to be creating any new shoreline impacts.
So how this came about was, a handful of people that I've talked to about various projects. One example I can give you is the Lighthouse property. They're 25, 30 feet from the shore. We've seen a couple different iterations of a multifamily development that they want to do there with ground floor, commercial of some sort. And if they tore the building down with our current regulations, they couldn't rebuild probably on that site at all. So that's what started this dialogue, and what can we do to, somebody that's got an existing footprint, if they want to rebuild on that footprint and are willing to perform some mitigation to enhance the shoreline, I think we should have that in our toolbox.
There are also just a couple of other changes which are kind of mostly housekeeping. In the comp plan, you may remember that there was a discussion about the requirement in the comp plan for everybody who does development on the shoreline to dedicate a 14-foot easement for continuation of the boardwalk. And our attorney had advised us that probably wasn't really legally enforceable, so we took that out of the comp plan. So I'm taking it out of the SMP here, just for consistency. And then there was just a cross-reference with the zoning code and the SMP, kind of saying, if you're in the shoreline, you don't just have to meet the SMP requirements, you also have to meet zoning code requirements. And there had been some question of which controlled or superseded, or did you even have to pay attention to zoning if you're just looking at the SMP, so just to make that more clear.
Because if someone wanted to develop, and forgive me, Carrie, the old Wilkins property.
It's 70. That one's probably not a good example because it's 75 feet back.
It is 75 feet back.
It's a handful of. It's
What
really
about-
the waterfront.
Well,
side.
it even Kitsap Bank. If
Yes.
Kitsap Bank wanted to do something different or remodel their main office, they're obviously within 75 feet of the waterfront, and I wouldn't want to see them move.
And it doesn't make sense because it's all concrete or asphalt, from there to the shoreline. And if Kitsap Bank did want to tear their building down and redevelop, they could with this proposal. I don't know if they actually own waterfront or if they're just within 75 feet, but if they had ownership of that waterfront, we would ask them to do then some improvements to make it better. But if they don't own it, then of course they don't have to do anything.
I don't know, I know that the walk goes right behind their building and the water's right there.
Well, I'm okay with it. It's the exact same exercise that we've gone through with the county. And so the arguments were fleshed out then. I've heard of that, and they were good.
And we thank you for doing that, because we piggybacked on it.
One of the things that also with nonconformities that we looked at some time ago was that we had a footprint requirement, and people were pretty creative in getting around that. And what they would do is they would cantilever their second story out. And so we had modified the code so that for those legal nonconformities, is what Title 17, our zoning code calls them, they had to meet the same overall bulk dimensional requirements. But you guys are now talking about if you go landward, that would be okay.
Although there is a provision here that if you're gonna go back landward or sideways, but you're gonna take out existing native habitat, then that is gonna have to be restored as well, even if you're going backwards from the buffer.
Yeah, so it was the sideways that I was wondering about.
That's also, if you're taking out native habitat, no matter where, additional habitat, you're gonna have to mitigate for that.
So that would be treated as if it were a new intrusion into the
Yes.
setback.
Yes. When you're talking about rebuilding with the same bulk and scale, that's not in here simply because I think we are trying to encourage, one-story buildings to be able to redevelop, go 2 or 3, if they can meet the height limit.
Right.
But I see what you're saying about, I guess we need maybe a definition of footprint, so that people aren't saying, well, my deck that extended out 30 feet
Right.
is part of my footprint. That's, okay,
It's a really good point, because we don't want,
on the ground.
15-foot cantilever towards the water.
Exactly.
So if we better define footprint, can we
Yes.
nail that?
That's really good, thank you.
And you might want to look at, if you're wanting to see an example, Title 17 of the county code, its nonconformities section. It was recently renumbered, so I don't know what it is, but it's in Title 17.
Okay, thank you.
Legal, or it's called nonconformities.
Okay.
So this is gonna go to the planning commission, correct?
It hasn't been scheduled.
Okay. Realistic to get it to the
I
planning
think,
commission?
I think that we have a meeting with staff. We're gonna go through some things with Stephanie because I wanna make sure that any other things we need to clean up in the shoreline master program, if there's other issues that we've had, that they all get addressed. But I think realistically, it's probably September on this one.
September planning commission?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I'm going to take that back. I think we could potentially introduce it to the planning commission in August, but maybe the hearing would be in September.
We have
So-
4 hearings on the schedule for August.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but I think if we want to provide it to them and just say, hey, this is coming up next month, and
It would be preference for you, I mean, it's nice to get stuff to read from, before you guys have a hearing, wouldn't it be?
What's that?
Versus
We can hear it.
Here it is in
Yes,
September.
we definitely
yeah,
can.
you're gonna take action on it.
Thinking it's in the middle of July now, we're talking 4 hearings in August 2nd. And,
But I'm just talking about, here's the concept, here's the material, you're gonna hold a public hearing a month in September is probably a better process, I think.
We don't have time now to give notice for hearing it.
Yeah.
But review it.
But here's what we're talking about, having a hearing on next month.
Okay,
I like that process better.
okay.
all right,
All right, next item is
implementation.
Title 6. Oh, yeah, so we could pull this off. I had asked that this go on before I saw it was on as a work study item.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll give Carrie instruction based on our
Okay.
discussion last night. I'll talk to her more about that later.
Yeah.
So these next 2 items are neat, and
Yeah.
they dovetail too. So I've met with a couple different people on different projects, and this shoreline masterpiece, when we came up and realized, my goodness, if they tore their building down, they
Right.
could rebuild that footprint. And so these others are issues that have popped up in due diligence and other projects too. One, we've determined that we're the only municipality around that has minimum use size.
Unit.
Unit size, unit size. Beck and I have talked, and we know how that came about. It was a number we picked through the DOD process, based on us thinking that downtown would be luxury condominiums, and they need to be of a certain size. Talking to staff, I think there's better ways to regulate unit size, or the size of or massing of units, and what are some of those tools?
Well,
it's a FAR ratio, I think is one of them.
I don't even know that I don't know that you need to get as involved in what happens inside of the building, except as it relates to, certain undesirable uses that you may want to regulate. But I think the more important thing is to focus on the exterior dimensions of the building, the massing, and the architectural details, so that you get buildings with an appearance that fits the character of the downtown. And whether you have small units or large units inside of that building, I don't think is as important an issue. And really, the market's going to determine that based on what people are able to rent. And I think also, given your proximity to the foot ferry, especially in your downtown, I mean, there may be a market for smaller units for either people who are military or working in the shipyard, or even people who might be commuting over to Seattle. You very well may have a market for smaller units that aren't allowed under the current regs.
So anyway, so that's why I brought that one forward. And then the other one is in our permitted, and I think globally and in the budget I'm going to bring forward, we need to tackle our design standards, and I believe we need a downtown corridor study. And that downtown corridor study will help us with the grant process, as I understand. But I don't believe that we can wait to fix these things. And there's cycles to the economy. And I know last time when we went through the DOD process, it took us a couple of years. We were in the mid-2000s. We finished it right at the beginning of an economic downturn, and so we missed that cycle. I would hate for us to think that we're going to complete these processes in 12 months, and it takes 16, 18 months, God forbid 2 years, because it's an extensive public process, and we miss out on economic opportunities because we're sitting on the sidelines because we have things that are preventing, I think we need to allow the market to dictate what should be inside of buildings. So the other one that we've come across here is, well, there's actually two, is one, we don't allow professional office space in the ground floor downtown. And with the exception of making sure there's sufficient windows on ground floor commercial space, I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between a retail space or an office space. They could be interchangeable. And if the market right now is saying there's a need for office space, why shouldn't we be allowing office space? Because otherwise we're going to have, we're requiring retail. We've got an abundance of vacant retail, and no one's going to build a project that requires them to build more retail that they can't lease. We need more heads
So
downtown.
what's the definition of that office space? I mean, is that, would it have to be primary use? Because I'm sure we've got a lot of retail.
The uses are classified in accordance with the SIC. It's a federal industrial classification system, and so I think they're pretty clearly designed. And there's usually professional office, I think, is one overarching category, and then there's a bunch of sub-uses that are specified that it would get down to the detail of, architecture firms are a type of professional use, or I think bail bonds are, and bail bonds are one thing that we have gone out of our way to restrict to the second floor downtown. But as of now, we don't allow that on the ground floor in the central DOD.
We had the discussion Monday at Economic Development, and what I brought forward, and I feel quite strongly about this, and when we originally did the DOD in the mid-2000s, I was strong about it then too. I do not feel that the ground floor should be restricted to retail. If you had, and let me use Rice Fergus as an example, Bremerton opened their arms to Rice Fergus the late 1998, 99 in there, and that architectural firm is now very much an economic driver in Bremerton, and we could embrace something like that. Again, I went back to the accounting firm that the bank used, Knight, Gregory in Tacoma, and they house, 20, 30 people in their office. And I could see that downtown, and I think that would be more of an economic driver for our downtown restaurants and retail businesses if we had a concentration of employment down there. And when I think of offices, business offices needing to be on the second floor, how do those businesses make them, how do they become ADA compliant? Because if you're an accountant, if you're an attorney, if you're an architect, you want to make sure all of your clients can get there. So I think we've really added a layer of expense to this type of business to put them on the second floor.
So I was curious on kind of, what meets the definition of office space? I mean, let's say you had a restaurant, I mean, compare that to Kitsap Bank. Kitsap Bank has a lot of offices.
And that's a service, that's classified as a service rather than a professional office, I think. But,
Is that an engineering firm or service? That's what I'm just wondering where that
But,
definition is.
a law firm,
Right.
a medical, a doctor's office, why would we
Right.
want, those are jobs,
yeah.
family wage jobs that,
I agree.
and then hopefully they want to live up above or within that block, I think that's what I'm hoping to try to create in our
Yeah.
downtown.
I agree with all that I've heard. I think there's a host of reasons to support it. There's the live-work soup that you want to create down there. There's jobs. There's the fact that what's working is not working so well.
What's in place is not working.
Yeah, that's what it
And
says.
at economic development, Nick went on when I talked about just exactly what I said. He responded with the fact that security becomes an issue, and those retails typically have windows so people can see in, and that's when he suggested that if we had business offices, we would need windows.
To make sure that our standards
Yeah.
require sufficient window space for it's just making our downtown more inviting. So I think there's some tweaks we need to make. Holistically, we need to take on this design standards, but I hope that we can, as we recognize the shortcomings in our uses and in our code that are inhibiting projects, that we can fix these ones and twos and then also work for a holistic look at, it's not just downtown, but the whole city in our design standards. So,
And the other thing that I had discussed was that currently we have this overlay district that has central in the wings, and then there's north of Bay Street and south of Bay Street that things are different. So you already have 4 divisions within the overlay district, but the challenge with the overlay district compared to actually assigning a zone to each of those areas where you'd have like a downtown 1, 2, 3, and 4 on your zoning map, and this is, I'm going to go a little bit further than I did on Monday, is we're working on a rezone process right now, and when you're in the overlay district, I don't know that you necessarily use the rezone process to change which side of Bay Street that you're on. But if you want to go from a downtown 1 to a downtown 2, it's a fairly simple application that council has the ability to authorize under our draft ordinance, because they're the final decision maker on a rezone application. And I also think that the 2 blocks in the middle of downtown, centered on Sydney, maybe are more appropriate for retail than services, but the rest of the central DOD and the wings probably should have services. So you could potentially end up with 5 downtown zones, but you may want to zone something in the central, the central 4 blocks of downtown to not allow offices now, but to allow them to get a rezone application if they want to develop something or redevelop one of those sites, and that gives them the avenue to change their zoning fairly easily without going through a comp plan amendment. And so that would be my proposal, is that we kind of get rid of the downtown overlay district in terms of the use restrictions and the height restrictions, and replace it with actual zones that correspond with, that are then in the zoning table, and each use is either permitted or conditionally permitted. And maybe there's some slight variation between where you're located in downtown. But I think it's a more logical way to lay it out. It's easier for people to read, and you also create a clear opportunity for people to apply for rezones if there is a redevelopment proposal on the table. And so that's kind of that, coupled with design guidelines for building massing and windows, and providing public plazas or other pedestrian amenities to kind of activate the street. Those three things combined, I think, will improve the regulations down there and make them more friendly to redevelopment.
There's one more piece to this, is that also, and I think it's probably only appropriate on the properties that face the water, where we're building a pedestrian pathway and trying to get more open space, and park-like space fronting these waterfront redevelopment opportunities. Our code currently allows no ground floor or walk-up units, and I think that is probably a very highly desirable unit to have in your menu. And once again, we're dictating, let the market to dictate if they
Right.
want to build walk-ups or not, and have end cap retail. Currently as it stands, you could only build retail in these. I don't know that that's what we want, facing the park. If we built a park or along the pathway. So I think we should, allow also, walk up. It isn't going to happen on the south side of Bay Street where the front of the building steps out onto Highway 166, but all along our pedestrian pathway, I think there's an opportunity for people to have a walk-up that has a patio that looks out onto, the pedestrian pathway and a park space.
And I would say that maybe one way to deal with that is that you could create a zone, but not put it anywhere on the zoning map right now, so that if somebody wants to take advantage of a zone that allows walk-ups, they do have to go through a rezoning. So council has some say over whether they're going to let that zoning apply at a specific site. And so you can almost sort of wait for a specific proposal before you decide to grant that use.
So how long, given the time frame, the things that, the solutions you're talking about, a time frame of those in relationship to due diligence that we know, some developers are doing?
Well, I've had, in terms of the DOD and adjusting the zoning tables, Carrie's already working on that. Obviously, we brought forward a proposal to get rid of the administrative CUP process, which is going to happen before we amend the other portions of the table to add these new downtown zones. But we've already started drafting this. I think really the question is, do you want to move forward on that without having design guidelines in place, or are you comfortable taking the risk that you're going to allow certain things to take place without having your design standards written and adopted? And so there may be some lag between completing design standards and actually changing the land use code. And so if you could do those together and make sure that everything works seamlessly and nothing comes in sort of midway through the process and there's some sort of loophole, or you could wait until everything's ready to go and approve it all at once.
You didn't answer the question. What?
That's not my decision.
If we took this piecemeal, are we talking 3 months? 6
Yeah,
months?
I think we could have it done this fall.
Because we'd still have the design review board.
Correct.
That has to look at every project. And I think we've talked too about tweaking that also. Once we have the design standards, they should, and we've got a good set of design standards, maybe they're looking at if you want to deviate from these standards that we've put in place versus looking at every project.
Yeah, I think the risk is actually, we do have a design review board, but because we don't have any adopted standards on which the design review board is basing their decisions, I think that there's the potential that we knock down some barrier to development, and then the design review board provides or imposes some sort of arbitrary condition on development. And I think that's where the risk is, that in the absence of standards, but with giving a body some authority to require some change, is it enforceable? And if a developer is willing to go along with it, that's fine. But if they're opposed to it, I don't think we have as much. I don't think we have a very good foundation to stand on to fight something like that.
I agree.
Okay, so how long would it take to do design standards?
I think we're looking at a 9-month process from whenever we start, and we have a scope of work to do citywide design standards that include downtown, but it's not specific to downtown. We had talked previously about potentially signing a contract this year, which would carry into next year, but right now I think it sounds like we're going to start in January as part of the new budget.
We won't money until next year.
So yeah, we're looking at 9 months on design
So
standards.
then we're a year out.
So Is there a way to consider some interim design standards though? I mean, essentially that would be finding something we like, a community we like, and cutting and pasting in the interim.
Yeah, I think that there are some things that we could adopt, but again, it's going to take us a few months to do that, on our own.
And we have design standards for downtown.
We have what's in Title 16 under the DoD, but it's fairly limited in terms of what's actually required in that chapter. We actually have more in our Tremont district, which we updated, and I brought some things from another jurisdiction where I had worked with a consultant to develop some standards, so we could extend those to the DoD. But my concern would be that if we go through the design review process and they start telling somebody what color something has to be or
Right.
what siding material has to be
Right.
in place when we haven't actually provided any guidance on that.
It's arbitrary.
Can we can we fix what we have a bit? Would that be the easier solution? I mean, ideally, we want these design standards and the proper process for it. It's just,
I guess
it's a year and a half.
I guess what I would say is that yes, we can, but I would recommend if you want to move forward with knocking down some of these barriers, I would at least temporarily eliminate design review, board review on projects in downtown until we have standards in place. So I think that would be the step that you take to avoid the potential that a project comes in and they are forced to review a project without any criteria for reviewing it. I would just take them out of it and hope that the developers who are coming in are going to do a good job, which I think that anybody who's going to come into our downtown and do a waterfront development probably isn't going to do something we don't like anyway. It's just, are they going to provide the finishes or the character that the community wants, which hasn't yet clearly been established.
I mean, the rub is we've got a design review board that could be dictate, think they have authority to dictate color and so on and so forth. Can't we just put some language in our current code that isn't the purpose? The purpose is to look at the, how the overall appearance of the building, the finishes.
So put in some design objectives, and then the applicant would have to demonstrate to the review board how they've met those objectives.
I think we could do that, though. I would be a little bit concerned that adopting those without more public process and more of a mandate from the public on what direction are we going with design. I think it's still, and I'd have to talk to the attorney more about this. I think it's a very difficult area, and you actually, with that the sign decision that came out, there was actually in one of the opinions that was issued on that said that architectural guidelines and restricting architectural speech is a First Amendment issue. And so there are some that are suggesting that restrictions on architectural design could be considered a restriction on expression or speech.
I'm willing to take that risk, and we could always back away from it, but I'm more inclined to limit the scope of what they're looking at versus abolishing it altogether. That makes me nervous.
But
I agree. It could be a big misstep depending on what could come forward.
I think that Rob and I and Mark are probably the only three at the table that when we started working on the DoD, and maybe you weren't involved.
I was out in the audience.
Okay, when we first started working on the DoD, there was a potential developer who wanted to take from like the theater and go around that corner. And he brought a mock-up.
Terrace project.
Oh my God, it was the ugliest thing you've ever seen. And I want to make sure we don't have the possibility of something like that coming forward if we don't have a review process at all. I mean, it was just.
I don't know. I've had, being in the private sector the majority of my career in doing these sorts of projects. I mean, there are definitely some jurisdictions that have very restrictive, onerous architectural review guidelines, right down to, well, they have to be of a certain historic style, Norwegian or whatever. Then there's certain colors, they limit color palette. I mean, they're super restrictive. There are others, and then when you get certain brands that struggle to come in and modify to make it look like that. But there are other, I think there was Puyallup. It was just very basic. The color palette had to be within a earth tone theme. You had to have varying frontage, deviations on.
We have a lot of this in our
That's what I'm saying,
current
but you
code.
keep it.
And I think
basic.
we leave that alone until we've got a better product or process. Really, what I'm only talking about is when we talked about the shoreline piece, I think that's a no-brainer. We're talking about changing uses, allowing some uses that we're currently still restricting, that we're trying to dictate the market, and we need to get out of the way of the market and let the market dictate what there's demand for. I want to fix our design standards, but I'm comfortable removing the design review board out of that process at this point until we've completely vetted another process. But I would like to put some further, if we're going to put commercial downtown or in office space downtown, I want us to look at to make sure that we're going to get the desired building frontages. The uphill side, the ground floor is going to be underground other than one side in most cases. You're not going to get a whole lot of windows other than the street front, but making sure that we're getting, and I guess we need to look at our current standards to make sure that it requires enough window frontage.
Yeah, and I mean, minimum glazing area is something that's easy to copy and paste from another jurisdiction and put in there. So there's some things that would be easy to put into our DOD, and some things that are in the Tremont zone that we could also extend to the DOD. But yeah, I think that realistically, probably by the end of the year, we could have this ready to go.
Interim, kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sort of an in-between adopting formal design standards for the city and where we are today. I think that would be realistic. And honestly, I think we need to address the zoning table issues before the consultant starts working on design guidelines, because until we've provided that framework for them, it's going to be hard for them to write something for us.
Did you guys talk about FAR yet?
Yeah, we already adopted.
Okay, I just.
We don't back up.
I think, go ahead.
You had a question?
Just a simple question. Is there a difference in tax generation between an office space and a retail space?
Not property.
Not a property tax, it's,
Sales tax, I don't know what kind of fees businesses.
Obviously,
charge.
an office building doesn't generate sales tax generated, but we don't have any,
You don't have a B&O tax.
we don't have a B&O
But
tax.
when you have the office building near your retail spaces, you're generating sales tax through having people there eating lunch or.
Customers, because you don't have customers. Family wage jobs.
The other thing about downtown, and this is, again, something that I said Monday, is I have no idea exactly what kind of retail people were looking for downtown. When they limited it to retail on the bottom, what type of retail did you want there? Just look at the topography. You're never going to get a Target or a Macy's or a furniture store. You're not going to get that. You're going to get boutique retail, and you're going to get restaurants and entertainment facilities.
Right. More
So that's what it
socially
is. So you're not going to have a lot of, unless you have a real high-end jewelry store there, a lot of sales tax generated. I can see where a combination of the commercial buildings and the people working there will support the retail more than just retail by itself. You have to look at the reality of what kind of sales tax.
It's a mix. We need, in this entire waterfront area, I think we need 500 more people living there. We need 150 or 150 people working there. And then the retail takes care of itself. There's demand. We created demand.
retail needs transactions. That's the first thing, my wife's the district manager, and it's the first thing when she goes into the area, first thing she looks at is, she needs to add on transactions. Transactions relate to foot traffic. And that's the minimum bar. There's a certain minimum transactions. If you're on a road, highway, it's trips, vehicle trips. If you're in a downtown area, when they do what they call the cafes, the non-drive-ups, it's all about transactions. And there's a certain minimum for they'll even consider looking in an area if they don't have a certain minimum transaction. That's foot traffic.
The other thing that I think is important to recognize is the employment center that we have at the top of the hill, and that's the county building. And I believe that the city of Port Orchard needs to embrace that employment center and do everything we can to support it and business that would support it. Again, architects or attorneys or land surveyors. I mean, we need to be open to provide that employment center the other businesses that they need. So anyway, I think we've really limited ourselves in our economic growth by what we've done with downtown.
And Mark, I was going to say, you mentioned FARs, and I was just going to say that I think FARs maybe aren't necessarily the right thing for downtown just because we allow 100% lot coverage. I think really just specifying sort of zone by zone what's the maximum height of the building, and maybe as part of redevelopment we want to say that there's a minimum height so that we don't see a one-story building go in our downtown. But we really ought to just focus on what is the lot coverage and the height of the building and try to work on massing and then architectural appearance of the building.
I guess I'll disagree on that because again, I've worked for a developer that actually had a good project that walked away from it because of the lack of height. And so you just, in construction, your main cost is in the foundation. And as you go up, that's where your profit is. And if you arbitrarily, and I'll use that word, because when I was out in the audience 9 years ago, I was arguing fervently for FARs. Bremerton established FARs, and as soon as they did,
Could you tell us what an FAR is?
floor area ratio.
So
What that says is as you increase the number of floors, you're required to reduce your footprint so that you create view windows.
Well,
Seattle does it.
that's sort of right. But if you have an FAR of 1, that means that whatever the square footage of the lot is, you get that many square feet at a one-story building. And if you want to go to 2 stories, you would cut your lot coverage in half, and you could go up 2. And so as you go up, the footprint shrinks.
Right.
And so if we went with an FAR of 4 downtown, which would allow a 100% site coverage 4-story building, that means it would also allow a 50% site coverage 8-story building. And so the difference there is that I think that there's some pretty strong objections to going too high in the city. And I think that at least in downtown, we want to encourage 100% use of the site, and that's what our code allows, with exception of setbacks in the absence of a firewall. I think we don't want surface parking. We might like some plazas, and so if you wanted to have a FAR of 4 and couple it with a minimum site coverage of 80%, that would allow you to go to 5 stories with 20% of your site being a plaza maybe. And so maybe that would be an appropriate way to do that. But
I'm just saying there's a way to mix in an FAR that allows a developer that says, I need 7 stories to make this work. I have a good product. I'm willing to reduce my square footage on these upper floors without going through a CUP process. Because you got to remember, before anybody comes and does a pre-app or has a conversation with the city, they've got people on the ground that are doing their due diligence, and they're just looking at
This is a bigger discussion, though, that's needs to be part of the design standards project that we're gonna do versus something that's a quick fix for what can potentially holding back a project.
Yeah, so let's talk about what we're going to do.
So I believe we're gonna take this to Shoreline program to the plan commission. We'd agreed to that. I think we talked about removing the minimum unit size
Okay.
I believe we talked about allowing office space on the ground floor. We want to have with some minimum standards on glazing and appearances on the front of the building, so that we're not having a concrete bunker built.
And we talked to Sean. Residential.
And then the residential on the ground floor.
And so the approach of breaking the DOD into zones that are actually designated on the map, that is something that the committee also would like to go forward with.
I think that's a good idea, but is that part of the design standards?
I think it is.
Yeah, you talked about making that.
I think it's not a it's more structural than it is substantive in terms of the revision. But I think it also allows for the option of having residential ground floor in a zone that isn't actually on the zoning map at this time. So you create that zone, but you don't necessarily designate it anywhere yet. And then I think the other question too was, is there a desire to treat those core 4 blocks of Bay Street as retail versus allowing offices in those locations, or would you like to have offices in there? And that just has to do with how many zones I create.
I personally, as long as it's built in a manner that it's convertible, why would we want to have 40 jobs downtown?
Well, and you're talking about building, and I'm thinking of it in terms of applying it to the existing buildings, which maybe is set up for office use.
Well,
And
if someone could buy the pavilion, and someone could easily put offices in there, and I would not have a problem.
Okay,
Do you still want a prohibition on bail bonds
Yes,
on the first floor?
okay.
but I think we don't need any more tattoo.
There aren't any. There's just the one.
This is the one, because we zoned for it.
Yeah. And I thought
They've
it was
gone out of business.
they're impossible to make right now.
Bay
On the
Street.
ground floor?
On the ground floor,
On the
okay,
ground
maybe I'm the problem.
I'm trying to remember what other restrictions are. There are specific restrictions on marijuana retailers, car dealers, auto supply, gas stations, boat dealers, adult entertainment, and fuel dealers. Are those all remaining the same?
That's within this central DOD.
Correct.
That's not the.
Yeah,
That's not the.
and you want those to stay though, right?
I would think so.
All right, and then, what are the other ones?
The
There's bail
central
bonds.
DOD is where, from Frederick to Seattle?
Yeah, and the other one is health services, which currently have to be on the second floor as well.
That's
I wouldn't have a problem.
professional office, pretty much everything.
A doctor's office,
Right.
if they wanted to be there, why wouldn't we?
I mean, they might have a bigger problem with open windows on the ground floor, but I don't think we should preclude them if they want to have.
Could be their lobby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's easy
Okay.
enough.
So remove the minimum unit size, look at offices and residential development on the ground floor with some interim design standards to sort of supplement where we are right now. You'll look at zones development with a longer term, with the design standards.
Correct, and this whole thing will come back with an updated zoning map that will include 4 color designations for downtown, whereas currently downtown is shown as mixed use. It's actually going to be brought forward as a zoning map that has probably 4 shades of some color, and then there will be a table that includes the uses for each of those and the height and setbacks and all of the other dimensional standards for each of those.
Okay. All right, last item is Title 12, complete streets.
Second to last, we had that one late addition.
And I want
Street
something
use
in
permits.
order too, this quick.
What was the addition?
The street use permits.
Oh, that's
economic
right.
development
That's
ones
right.
added.
That's right.
So the complete streets ordinance, and Mark can probably speak to this a little bit too. Essentially, we had a grant agency ask if we had a complete streets ordinance. We said it's in our comp plan. They said, no, you need to adopt an ordinance.
Right.
That we were provided an example off of MSRC that we mostly, I think we combined 2 of them together to create this. I don't think it creates a significant burden on the city, but it is sort of an additional standard.
Mhm.
And so hopefully this can help us get some additional grant funding and open up some further sources.
And it looks complementary to what was adopted with the comp plan as well, and the goals and objectives there.
Yeah, I mean, so TIB is just like PSIC, because they take funding cycles as an opportunity to bring people into what I'll say alignment, not necessarily compliance. If it were compliance, like the greenhouse gas, you can't actually submit an application unless you have a greenhouse gas policy. Complete Streets are still in the alignment phase with the initiative. That, you know, it's a statewide, I don't know if it's, I'm sure it's a nationwide initiative to provide both, to provide motorized, non-motorized, and transit-friendly development. And so that's really what the initiative is, and that's what the goals and policies are. And so TIB is just, again, during this funding cycle, they're going through, because that's when they can touch all the jurisdictions and say, oh, by the way. So really, that's what this is.
So this is kind of them talking out of both sides of their mouth, though. They want us to do this, but yet they want us to value engineer sidewalks out of one side of the project.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that was my head scratching moment.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
So anyway, I mean, I think that there's not a whole lot that comes out of this other than that we design and build future projects to be complete streets, and that we monitor our performance in furthering this complete streets goal. This could be ready to go to council next week if you wanted it to. I don't know when we need it in terms of our grant application.
No, it's not a requirement of grant.
So
But is it a box we need to check?
If it doesn't help us become more competitive with
It will in the future.
Okay.
will this preclude us from value engineering Fremont?
No. In fact, I'm gonna send Steve Dorchester a letter or an email on his last email that basically, because we talked about the deviation process on the sidewalk, and I'm gonna suggest that we'll do the deviation on the south side for that short segment. That's all we're gonna do.
Well, and I had another thought on that. I can talk offline, but my thought was if we're not doing it on the south side, would we need the wall if the alignment shifted slightly?
We don't wanna shift down there. We're shifting the road over from South Kitsap to Pottery.
Okay.
We don't wanna, I mean, yeah, because you've already got we're holding
We'll
basically.
go offline on this.
Yeah.
This is taking the sound of weeds. We gotta get.
And I actually have to leave. I've got to head north.
I've got one. Remember the citizen that commented on the view protection? The woman that there's
Oh,
a
yes,
mayor.
right.
Yeah, okay, so what we determined was there is a process. I don't think you want to have that. I think we should fix that in our code and remove that reference that the mayor has the ability. Those are civil matters.
civil.
Yeah.
That you don't want me sticking my nose in
Oh,
the middle of
cutting the trees.
whose trees need to be cut and why.
it should be-
That's bad.
We can include that into our revisions we can strike that as part of our update of the DOD stuff because we're gonna be opening essentially all of those chapters.
Okay, so I think that's gonna be our comment back to her is, thanks for bringing this to our attention. We still feel it's a civil matter and we're not currently utilizing that aspect of our code and we should remove it from our code.
So then finally, the right-of-way use chapter, economic development recommended approval. We don't have a work study until September, but I think the desire was to get this moving, and so it can go forward next week. We just wanted an opportunity to share it with another committee to get more eyes on it and to see if you had any questions about what's proposed. We provided a strike-through version from our first iteration of this to our current one. We currently don't have a right-of-way use chapter, and this is going to grant entirely new privileges to people to use the right-of-way where previously we've offered none. So this is allowing sidewalk tables, if somebody wants to come in, if they need to build a retaining wall to hold back dirt or something, but it's on public property, but it helps support a hillside. I mean, there's a whole variety of things that can take place under this use ordinance, and it gives the Director of Public Works the authority to review that for safety concerns and to potentially approve something with conditions such as maintaining ADA widths on a sidewalk. But anyway, I think this is ready for a vote. I don't think we need a public hearing on this necessarily, but we could certainly put one on the agenda if you wanted to take testimony on it. Okay, we won't be able to, it wouldn't be able to go to the paper for next meeting, but we could still put it on the agenda and take any testimony. It's not required to have a public hearing.
And it, when you read it, it became a more complex document when it started as just being able, the bistro wanted to put out at their time a couple of tables and
Right.
chairs, and it expanded, and now it includes a lot of things. And so the economic development was tickled that we finally have something that we could bring forward.
Yeah, it's come full circle.
Yeah.
From
So-
involving the DOT, not involving
Thanks.
the DOT. Now, and this did, at one time, this was going to be more replacing of our current right-of-way use chapter.
Your excavations.
Excavation, working the right-of-way, and we've kept that separate, so it doesn't dovetail, it dovetails, but it doesn't.
Yeah. And really this gives, there's 4 things that we can require under this, including insurance, naming the city as additionally insured, performance bonds and other sureties, cash assignments, et cetera. So this is really, it's very flexible. It covers a broad range of things that people may want to do, and it gives Mark the ability to process those requests
Makes sense.
and protects freedom of the press to have these
This year,
things.
we still might get 3 or 4 days you could actually eat outside.
Yeah,
think-
I heard it's going to get warm here real soon, it sounds like.
Today.
So, today?
One of the most mildest winters on record.
April was the
Yeah,
hot,
hot spring.
phase in April.
It's supposed to be nice next week.
Almost 80 today.
Time for me to.
Thank you all.
Is the land use committee planning to meet in August? Economic development,
Took a
totally
month off.
canceled, so, just for scheduling.
We should probably talk offline on that, see what Scott wants to do.
We-
Honor our
We have our
chair.
agenda.
Nothing right now. We tentatively canceled economic development, and I'd suggest that we do the same, but if something comes up, we can still try to schedule something.
That was kind of how we left
That's
it.
fine.
We just have a few minor things pending.
Okay.
Okay?
So there's 6 of those in the building.
So,
Repeaters?
Yeah.
did you get it working?